Magandang araw mga bata! Ako si Ma'am Regine, ang teacher mo sa math. Today we will be learning about the presentation of data. This is a lesson for grade 7 mathematics under quarter 4, lesson 4 and 5. Kaya tara na, and let's do the math. Before you proceed in watching this video for our lesson 4 and 5, the presentation of data, I would really recommend that you watch the previous lessons for quarter 4 from lesson 1 to 3 para mas madali nating maintindihan ang presentation of data para step by step, sunod-sunod yung ating pagkakatuto nitong statistics. In lesson 1, we've learned about what statistics is all about, its purposes and functions, as well as the survey questionnaire, kung paano tayo makakapag-collect ng data. For lesson 2, we've learned about other ways in collecting data aside from a survey questionnaire and how we can organize them through a table or stem and leaf display. In lesson 3, we've learned about frequency distribution for both the grouped and ungrouped data. Kaya naman para sa lessons 4 and 5, since tapos na tayo sa collection and organization of data, it's time for us to present the data now. Para sa lesson na ito, we will be given a situation and then we'll be applying what we've learned from the previous lessons up to the present. For situation 1, we have data from a survey. What do we do with this data? The TLE teachers conducted a survey among incoming grade 9 students. They asked a sample of 200 students with the following survey question. From this given scenario, yung ating situation 1, makikita agad natin yung mga important elements. The TLE teachers, sila yung ating researchers, sila yung nagko-conduct ng study. Survey, ito yung kanilang method of collecting data. Incoming grade 9 students, ito naman yung ating respondents. Sa kanilang mga sagot, manggagaling yung ating data. Sample of 200 students, meaning 200 na piraso ng raw data from grade 9 students yung ating makukuha from this specific study. And ginamit nila ay survey question, which is one of the most common statistical instrument in collecting or gathering data. Ang tanong natin, how can we collect the data? Ito ang ginamit na survey questionnaire ng ating mga TLE teachers. Maliit at simple lang, kung ano ang kailangan, iyon lang talaga yung nakasulat. Very direct to the point. From this given scenario, we can deduce that the subject area is all about the TLE 9 subjects. And the problem statement, in which TLE specialization would you like to enroll? Ito yung pinaka-kailangan nilang masagot na inquiry. At ito yung mga possible na sagot. We have 4. We have cookery, dressmaking, electronics, and nail care. In this scenario, ang ating purpose of statistics ay for comparison. We'd like to compare which among the TLE specialization subjects na given dito sa 4 ang gustong i-enroll ng ating respondents, who are the incoming grade 9 students. For the method of collecting data, ang ginamit ay indirect method dahil ang statistical instrument na ginamit ay survey questionnaire. Once collected na ang ating data, next question natin, how can we organize these data? For the organization of data para sa scenario na ito, ang method of organizing data na ginamit ay frequency distribution. And this is the frequency distribution constructed out of the answers ng ating mga respondents. Now, tapos na tayo sa collecting of data, tapos na rin i-organize yung data. Next question is, how can we present these data? Ano kayang method ang gagamitin ng ating mga researchers para i-present yung kanilang nakuhang data? Tandaan na sila ay nag-expect ng 4 answers. Pwedeng ang sagot ng bata ay cookery, pwedeng electronics, dressmaking, or nail care. At marami pa silang mga possible na makuha because we have a total sample of 200 students. Imagine kung ang ibibigay sa ating presentation of data ay ganito. Nilista lang nila kung ano-ano yung mga subjects na pinili ng mga respondents nila without properly presenting them. Worst is kung ibigay lang nila yung number of responses per TLE specialization without properly including which specific subject yung nakakuha ng mga numbers of responses na ito. Kaya naman napaka-importante ng magandang presentation of the data. Dahil kapag na-present na natin ang maayos yung data, yung result ay clearly communicated, we can then proceed to another step of statistics. We can analyze it, we can interpret the data now, and then we can draw conclusions from it for future decision making. In this lesson, we will be focusing on the ways on how you can present your data. For presentation of data, very important na alam natin ang graph. A graph is a pictorial representation of a set of the statistical data to make it easier to understand and interpret into statistical information. We have the following graphical representations. First, we have the bar graph. A bar graph is a representation that uses bars or rectangles that show the frequency of each category. Based sa ating scenario kanina, say for example, ang napiling method of presenting data ng ating mga researchers ay bar graph, we will be constructing a bar graph out of the frequency distribution constructed when they organized the data that they have collected. For bar graph, ang una natin gagawin ay gumawa ka muna ng rectangle na may mga lines that will serve as our grid. Ito ay yung ating title ng bar graph. Make sure that your graphical representations always have a title so that it's easily understood. Madali nating maintindihan na this graph is specifically for this specific subject matter. In constructing bar graphs, napaka-importante kung ilan yung elements natin for that specific representation. In this case, dalawa lamang yung ating elements. Yung TLE specialization, we only have 4, at yung frequency per TLE subject. There will be some instances wherein mas complex yung ating bar graph dahil mas maraming elements. Say for example, indicated pa yung gender ng respondents. Halimbawa, out of 42 na pumili ng cookery, 20 of them ay male, and then 22 ay female. Pwede natin yung i-compare side by side using a bar graph, which will make it complex. Pero in this scenario, simple bar graph lamang ito, 2 elements lang yung ating kailangan. Meron tayo ditong horizontal, yung ating x-axis, at meron din tayo ditong vertical, para naman sa ating y-axis. May ilalagay tayong element para dito sa horizontal part ng bar graph, at may ilalagay rin tayong element para naman sa vertical na part ng ating bar graph. Simulan natin doon sa horizontal part niya, sa x-axis. Ilalagay natin dito ay yung 4 na subjects, TLE specialization, cookery, dressmaking, electronics, and nail care. Para naman dito sa kanyang vertical part, yung ating y-axis, ilagay naman natin yung frequency. Pansinin natin itong ating frequency sa y-axis. Itong pinakakanto, we are starting from 0, and then nag-increase siya by 5 hanggang 75. Wala tayong specific formula kung paano tayo magko-construct nitong frequencies para sa y-axis. You can just set it depending on your frequency. Make sure na makikita natin clearly itong mga frequency kapag tinag na natin yun dito sa ating bar graph. In this case, by 5s yung ginawa, pwede ring by 10s, by 20s, but that will be for a greater number of responses. Since ang mga responses natin ay hindi naman malaki, pwede na ito. For our frequency, yung ating lowest frequency ay 36. Covered siya dahil nag-start naman tayo sa 0. Ang importante ay titignan natin yung ating highest frequency, which is 68. Ang 68 ay pasok hanggang 75. Actually, kahit hanggang 70, kaya na siya. Pero para maganda lang yung ating presentation ng data, you can choose to add 75 or 80 depending on which you prefer. Ngayon na naiset na natin yung ating horizontal and vertical part ng ating bar graph, simulan na nating i-shade. We'll be using bars or rectangles per frequency in each category. Simulan natin sa cookery. For cookery, according to the frequency distribution, we have 42 responses. Ito yung cookery. Ito yung ating ginamit na bar. Ilagay natin yung bar natin sa tapat ng cookery. From 0, hahanapin natin yung 42. Now, 42 is in between 40 and 45. Kaya pansinin natin na yung ating bar or rectangle ay set above 40 but not above 45. Ibig sabihin na sa gitna siya. Dahil 42 lang yung ating itinatag. This is the importance kung bakit by 5s yung ating ginawa para makita natin yung mga trailing digits. Next, dressmaking. Ang dressmaking natin ay 68. Kaya, simula rito, syempre dun tayo sa tapat ng dressmaking. From 0 up until 68. Pansinin natin na yung grid natin. Lagpas siya ng 65, pero hindi siya lumagpas ng 70. Way below siya ng 70. Dahil ang ating itinatag ay 68 na frequency. Next, for electronics, we have frequency na 36. Starting from 0, syempre sa tapat ng electronics. From 0 up until 36. Ito yung 35 at ito naman yung 40. Pansinin natin na hindi siya lumagpas ng 40 at umangat lang siya ng kaunti sa 35. Dahil ang frequency na tinatag natin ay 36. Lastly, we have the nail care na ang frequency ay 54. Sa tapat ng nail care natin ilalagay. At yung ating frequency ay magsisimula sa 0 up until 54. Pansinin, ito yung ating grid for 50, ito naman for 55. Yung ating rectangle para sa bar graph natin, para sa nail care, ay just below 55. Dahil 54 yung ating itinatag. Pansinin din natin for bar graphs na meron tayong spaces in between them. And these spaces must be equally apart. Ito na yung ating presentation of data for the given scenario doon sa ating TLE specialization. This is an example of a vertical bar graph. For bar graphs, we can also present it horizontally. Ito yung ating pwedeng maging result kapag horizontal bar graph naman. Pinagbaliktad lang natin yung pwesto ng mga elements. For bar graphs, you can choose whether you will construct it vertically or horizontally. You can even include the number of frequency, yung responses, for a better presentation of data. Dahil yun ang importante kapag tayo ay nagpe-present ng data. Clearly communicated yung ating mga results. Once we're done constructing our bar graph based on this frequency distribution, we can then answer some questions looking at the bar graph alone. How many students choose cookery? So in this bar graph, ito yung ating graph for the respondents na ang pinili ay cookery, which is 42. How many students chose nail care? Punta naman tayo sa nail care, hanapin natin ang nail care, at ito yung kanyang graph na nakatapat sa 54. Which TLE 9 subject shows you the tallest bar in the graph? Ang tallest bar natin dito ay para sa dressmaking, dahil ang kanyang frequency ay yung pinakamarami, which is 68. Ang total opposite ng dressmaking naman ay electronics. Ito yung ating shortest bar in the bar graph dahil ang kanyang frequency ay yung least, which is 36 only. Last question, which bars have the least difference between their heights? Papansinin natin, ang may pinakamalapit na height between the four ay ang cookery at ang electronics dahil masyadong malayo kung dressmaking and electronics. Nail care and cookery malapit rin naman, but cookery and electronics ay mostly magkalapit lang sila dahil yung frequency nila, kung mapapansin natin, cookery ay 42 at ang electronics ay 36. So magkalapit lang sila. Sila may kakaunting difference, which is 6. Aside from bar graph, we also have another way of presenting the data, pie chart. It's a circular diagram that shows the proportion of each category, which are usually labeled by either percent or a fraction. But how do we construct a pie chart? To complete a pie chart, you need to compute for the following first. You have to compute for the percentage of each observation as well as the number of degrees for the sector for each observation. Gawa muna tayo ng table. I-organize din natin yung ating data for a pie chart using a table. table na may 4 columns. First column natin ay for the TLE specialization. Second column ay para sa frequency. Third ay para sa percentage, since hinahanap natin yung percentage of each observation. And of course, yung fourth column natin ay para sa number of degrees. For TLE specialization, ilista natin one by one yung ating 4 na subjects: cookery, dressmaking, electronics, and nail care. At ilagay na rin natin side by side yung kanilang frequency according to the frequency distribution. Once complete na natin yung ating frequency column, find its end value, yung ating total sample, which is 200. Add them all together, dapat 200 yung maging result. Now, for the percentage of each observation, kailangan natin gumamit ng formula na ito. Frequency in each category divided by the end value multiplied by 100. Ang ating frequency per category ay 42 for cookery, 68 for dressmaking, 36 for electronics, and 54 para naman sa nail care. At ang ating end value ay 200. Let's start with the first TLE specialization, cookery. Substitute yung ating data. 42 ay ang kanyang specific frequency divided by 200, the total value, total number of frequency. 42 divided by 200 ay 0.21 and then multiply it by 100. Ang result ay 21 and then add the symbol for percent dahil percentage ang ating hinahanap. Kaya naman ang percentage ng cookery ay 21%. Next, punta naman tayo sa dressmaking. Substitute ulit. 68 yung kanyang frequency over 100, which is the total number of frequency. 68 divided by 200 is 0.34 multiplied to 100, which is 34%. Next, punta naman tayo sa electronics. Substitute 36 yung kanyang frequency divided by 200, which is 0.18 multiplied to 100 is equal to 18%. Lastly, we have nail care. Substitute natin. 54 ang kanyang frequency divided by the end value 200, which will result to 0.27 multiplied by 100. Ang percentage nito ay 27%. Add all of them, we will get a total of 100%. Next, punta naman tayo sa number of degrees for the sector for each observation. Sector, this is a familiar term because this is one of the parts of a circle. This is a portion of a circle. We can compare it with a slice of a pizza. Familiar din tayo sa term na degrees. We know that this is a unit of measurement for an angle at alam natin na ang total number of degrees of one whole circle ay 360 degrees. Now, one by one, kunin natin yung number of degrees nitong ating TLE specialization. What we'll have to do is get the portion for each TLE specialization. So that will be 21% of 360 degrees for cookery. Para naman sa dressmaking, we need to get 34% of 360 degrees. 18% of 360 degrees para sa electronics, and then 27% of 360 degrees para naman sa nail care. Now, these phrases are familiar to us because we've discussed this in quarter 1. We're getting a part of a whole, which is either percent or fraction. Let's find the number of degrees per TLE specialization, starting off with cookery, 21% of 360 degrees. 0.21 multiplied to 360 degrees. 0.21 ay nakuha natin dito sa frequency divided by end value. Hindi muna natin i-multiply by 100. 0.21 multiplied to 360 degrees. This is 21% of the entire 360 degrees. Multiply them together at ang ating result ay 75.6 degrees. Next, for dressmaking, 34% of 360 degrees. 0.34 multiplied to 360 degrees is equal to 122.4 degrees. Next, for electronics, 18% of 360 degrees, that is 0.18 multiplied to 360, that is equal to 64.8 degrees. Lastly, for nail care, that's 27% of 360 degrees.
0.27 multiplied by 360 is equal to 97.2 degrees. And if we total all of them, 75.6 plus 122.4 plus 64.8 plus 97.2, add them all together, we will get 360 degrees. Once we're done computing for the percentage of each observation as well as the number of degrees per sector, tapos na natin i-organize yung ating table, it's time for us to construct the pie chart. Constructing a pie chart. First, you need to get the necessary geometric tools for the construction. This is a protractor used to measure angles. You can also use this kind of protractor, isang buong bilog siya. Pansinin natin yung difference. Yung isang protractor ay half circle lamang, ito ay buo. For a protractor, siya ay may 180 degrees lamang, kalahati. At yung isang buong circle siya ay 360 degrees. Aside from that, you can also use a compass and then a ruler. Ito yung ating summary of the table. Daily specialization, frequency, percentage, and number of degree. For constructing the pie chart, I'll use this geometric tool for construction kasi mas madali siya, isang buong bilog na. But you can always opt to choose the other two. I'll start by marking the center of the circle, then one by one, construct tayo no sectors per daily specialization. Per cookery, out of 360 degrees, ang kanyang katumbas ay 76 degrees. Ito yung ating center starting from this point, 0 up until 76. So, simulan natin. Maglagay tayo ng line dito from the center to 0. Next natin hahanapin ay 76. Ito yung 76. After 75, hindi lalagpas ng 80. Ito na yung ating sector for cookery. Next, for dressmaking, 122. What we'll need to do is to add 76 plus 122 is equal to 198. Kaya from 76, hahanapin natin yung 198. Lagay tayo ng isa pang line. Ito yung 198. Hindi siya lalagpas ng 200. From 76 up until 198, ang katumbas niyan ay 122 degrees. Ito na yung ating sector for dressmaking. Next, for electronics, 65 degrees. From 198, add 65, 263. Hanapin natin ang 263 degrees. Maglagay tayo ng line. Ito na yung ating sector for electronics. 198 up until 263, ang katumbas niya ay 65 degrees. Lastly, nail care. Ito na yung ating sector for nail care. Dahil 263 plus 97 is equal to 360 degrees. From these points and markings, pwede na tayo mag-construct ng ating circle. Ilagay na rin natin yung mga percentages, bawat specialization. Finalize na natin, lagyan natin ang border. At syempre, napaka-importante na ilagay natin yung ating title of these representation, which is Student's Choice of TLE 9 Subjects. Ito na yung ating na-construct na pie chart out of the frequency distribution dun sa ating situation 1 kanina, manually. However, you can also choose to use computers for you to construct a pie chart. Choose Insert and then look for Chart. I-click natin yung chart. Once na-click mo na yung chart, may mag-a-appear na dialog box at papipiliin ka kung anong specific chart ang iyong gagawin. Pwedeng pie chart, pwedeng bar graph, and other types of graphs. Pwede yun. In this case, ang pipiliin natin ay pie chart. Once pinili mo ang pie chart, lalabas itong Excel na ito. Magpa-pop up itong mini Excel na ito. Dito sa ating column A, ilalagay natin yung mga specialization natin. We have 4. And then dito sa column B, ilalagay naman natin yung ating percentage. You can opt not to include 100 since wala naman siyang katapat na element under ng TLE specialization. Automatic naman na pag in-add natin itong 4, 100. Once na-input mo na ng maayos yung iyong data, lalabas na yung iyong choices for the pie chart. Ito yung napili ko na design, but you can choose other designs depending on your preference. Mas madali mag-construct ng pie chart using a computer. And this is available to Microsoft Office. Ang ginamit ko dito ay galing ito sa PowerPoint. Pwede sa Word, pwede sa Excel, and so on. Once we're done constructing our pie chart, we can then answer some questions about the data. Itong ating legend, kung anong kulay yung katabi ng specialization, yun yung kanyang tinutukoy. Say for example, itong nail care, yellow, ito. Dressmaking, orange. Cookery, blue. Gray, electronics. So, titignan natin yung legends when we answer some questions. Say, which TLE9 subject has the greatest proportion chosen by the students? Pinakamalaking proportion out of the 4 ay 34%. This is orange, therefore, dressmaking. On the other hand, what TLE subject has the least percentage? Ang pinakamaliit ay 18%. Gray ito, kaya this is pertaining to electronics. What percent of the students chose nail care? So, nail care natin ay kulay yellow, 27%. How much greater in proportion is cookery than electronics? So, ang cookery ay 21 at ang electronics ay 18. Difference nila. So, 21 minus 18 is equal to 3. Kaya ang difference of cookery and electronics ay 3%. Last question, if the needed number of teachers will be based on the number of their students, which TLE subject should have the greatest number of teachers? That will be dressmaking dahil out of these 4, pinakamaraming respondents ang pumili na sila ay mag-e-enroll for dressmaking. Therefore, kung tayo ay mag-e-employ ng teachers per subject, dapat mas maraming teachers ang mag-handle ng dressmaking dahil yung demand for dressmaking ay greater as compared to the other 3. Aside from bar graphs and pie charts, another type of graphical representation is a line graph. It is an illustration useful in presenting data that indicate changes over a period of time. We can apply line graph in various situations, say for example, weather temperature. A science teacher would like to study how the temperature changes within a day. Thus, he recorded the temperature readings after every hour. Below was his record. Nag-start siya from 9 a.m., nag-stop siya ng 4 p.m. at ito yung kanyang mga temperature readings recorded per hour. Gagawa tayo ng line graph to illustrate this data. For line graphs, parang kamukha rin ito ng bar graph. Meron tayong rectangle na may mga grids para maging markings at hindi tayo malito. Meron tayong grids for horizontal, ito yung kanyang x-axis. At meron din tayong grids para naman sa vertical, yung kanyang y-axis. And then we will plot this data. Itong nasa horizontal part natin, itong x-axis, ito yung mga time readings from 9 a.m. up until 4 p.m. This is what we call the independent variable. At ito namang nasa vertical natin sa y-axis, ito yung kanyang mga temperature in degrees Celsius. Ito naman yung ating dependent variable. Meaning, nagdedepende yung temperature kada oras. Notice that we started from 0. We always start from 0. And then from 0, tumalo ng 20, and that's okay. Because the lowest frequency here is 23. And then the highest frequency here is 27. Pansinin natin na from 0, nag-20 agad hanggang 30. And then by ones yung kanyang ginamit. Tandaan natin mga bata na para sa line graph and bar graph as well, wala tayong condition na siniset para dito. You can choose either by 5s, by 10s, by 20s, in this case by 1s, tapos tumalo na siya from 0 to 20, and that is okay. So long as your purpose is to clearly illustrate your data. And this is an example of a vertical line graph. Pwede rin naman natin siyang gawing horizontal, babalik na rin lang natin yung pwesto ng elements. Once you're able to set your variables in horizontal or vertical part sa kanilang x or y axis, it's time for you to start plotting yung data starting from 9 a.m. For 9 a.m., ang na-record niya na temperature ay 23 degrees. Hanapin natin yung intersection ng 9 a.m. at 23 degrees. That is in this part. And then, plot. Next, 10 a.m. and 24 degrees. Hanapin natin yung intersection. Ito naman sa 10 a.m., itong line na ito, at 24 degrees. So, dito yan. And then, plot. Ito yung kanilang intersection. Next, for 11 a.m., hanapin natin ang intersection ng 11 a.m. at 26 degrees. Ito ang 11 a.m. At ito naman ang 26. Yung kanilang intersection ay dito. So, plot natin. 12 noon, recorded ay 27. Ito ang 12 noon. Ito naman ang 27. Yung intersection nila ay ito. Next, 1 p.m. Ito ang para sa 1 p.m. Ang recorded ay 27 degrees as well. Ito yung kanilang intersection. For 2 p.m., ito naman yung line natin para sa 2 p.m. Hanapan natin yung kanyang katapat na recorded temperature, which is 25 degrees Celsius. And then plot, ito yung kanilang intersection. 3 p.m. ay 24 degrees. Ito yung 3 p.m. At ito naman yung 24. Yung intersection nila ay itong part na ito. Then lastly, for 4 p.m., ang recorded natin ay 24 degrees Celsius. Ito yung para sa 4 p.m. At ito naman yung 24. Plot din natin. Ito yung 24. Once we're done in plotting these data, connect the dots. Starting from 9 a.m., connect natin sa 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. to 12 noon, 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3 p.m., and 4 p.m. Ito na yung ating line graph para sa data na ito. Looking at this line graph, we can answer some questions. What is the lowest temperature between 9 a.m. until 4 p.m.? Ang may pinakamababa dito sa plotting natin ng line graph ay 23 degrees sa 9 a.m. Yun yung ating lowest frequency. At what time or times was the highest temperature measured? Papansinin natin yung ating line graph. Ang nasa pinakatuktok ay itong dalawang ito. Both at 27 degrees Celsius, recorded siya nung 12 noon and 1 p.m. Between what times are there no change in temperature? So, looking at our line graph, pansinin natin na straight lamang from 12 noon to 1 p.m. Straight lang siya, yung na-form natin na line. Dahil pareho siyang 27 degrees. Aside from that, from 3 to 4 p.m., straight line lang din. Dahil pareho lang naman silang 24 degrees Celsius. Next question, what is the increase in temperature between 9 and 11 a.m.? Ito yung 9 a.m., ito naman yung 11 a.m. Disregard muna natin yung 10 a.m. dahil ang question natin ay 9 and 11 a.m. Ang difference nila ay from 23 ng 9 a.m., 11 a.m. naging 26 degrees Celsius. So there is a difference of 3 degrees Celsius from 9 to 11 a.m. Last question, between what times is there a decline of temperature? Yung decline ng temperature natin o yung pagbaba ng temperature ay nagsimula sa part na ito. Dahil kung papansinin natin from 9 a.m. up until 12 noon, meron tayong steady increase in temperature. But from 12 noon to 1 p.m., pansinin natin na nag-start na hindi na nag-increase pero hindi rin naman nag-decline. Pareho lang na temperature. From 1 p.m., nag-start na siyang mag-decline up until 3 p.m. and 3 and 4 p.m. ay pareho lang yung temperature. Another situation about motion. A jeepney is moving straight ahead along Maharlika Highway. You'd like to study the motion of the jeepney by knowing its displacement from the starting station at different times of your travel. Here are the recorded displacements. For displacements, ito yung ating frequency distribution. Ito yung time reading natin starting from 1 o'clock up until 1:10 p.m. Ito naman yung displacement from 0 meters up until 1,050 meters. Magbalik tayo dito sa ating word problem. When we say motion, this is a change of movement of an object over time. At ang displacement naman, this is referring to the change in position. Pero walang involved na time. When an object changed in position, considering the time, we have motion. Now, from this frequency distribution, we will be creating a line graph. Gawa ulit tayo ng ating line graph. Yung independent variable natin ay nasa baba pa rin, which is time. At yung ating displacement na dependent variable ay nandito pa rin sa ating y-axis. Pansinin natin dito para sa ating displacement which is recorded in meters, nagsimula tayo sa 0 and then by 100s yung ating sinet. Once you're able to set your elements in their x and y axis, we can now start plotting starting from 1 p.m. which is 0 meter. Ito yung ating 1 p.m. Ito naman yung 0. Intersection nila ay ito. So, plot tayo. 1-2 p.m. 250 meters. Ito yung 1:02 p.m. Ito naman yung 250. Pansinin na in between 200 and 300, meron tayong isang space which is referring to 250 meters. Kaya, i-plot natin, iyon yung kanilang intersection. For 1:04 p.m., 400 meters. Ito yung 1:04 p.m. Ito naman yung 400. So, mag-plot tayo. Ito yung kanyang intersection nilang dalawa. 1:06 p.m., ang na-record natin ay 550. 550 ay in between 500 and 600. Yung kanilang intersection ay ito. Para naman sa 1:08 p.m., ito ang 1:08 p.m. Ang recorded natin ay 850 meters which is in between 800 and 900. Ito yung kanilang intersection. Lastly, for 1:10 p.m., ang recorded na displacement ay 1,050 meters which is in between 1,000 and 1,100. Ito yung kanilang intersection. Once we're done plotting, connect the dots 1 p.m. to 1:02, to 1:04, to 1:06, 1:08, up until 1:10 p.m. Ito na yung ating line graph for this frequency distribution. From this line graph, we can also answer some questions. What is the displacement at 1:02 p.m.? At 1:02 p.m., ang ating displacement ay 250 meters. At what time was the displacement equal to 850 meters? So, hanapin natin yung 850 meters dito. Ito ay katapat ng 1:08 p.m. Between what time periods is the slant of the line the steepest? Pag sinabi nating slant, ito, slanted. Hindi kasi diretso yung line natin, so slanted siya. Saan yung pinaka matarik? Steepest. When we say steep, it refers to the rise or decline that is very sharp as compared to the others. Kumbaga, merong biglang pagtaas o pagbaba. And that is happening from 1:06 to 1:08 p.m. Kasi from 550, naging 850 siya. Kaya ito yung steepest part natin ng ating line graph. Next, between 1:02 p.m. and 1:06 p.m., what is the change in displacement? So, ito yung 1:02 p.m. For 1:02 p.m., tayo ay may displacement na 250. And for 1:06 p.m., ito naman yun, ang ating displacement recorded naman ay 550. So, what is the difference in displacement? 550 sa 1:06 p.m. minus 250 ng 1:02 p.m. That is 300 meters. Yun yung difference of displacement. Last question, it took how many minutes to reach the displacement of 850 meters? Ang 850 meters na displacement natin, it happened at 1:08 p.m. From 1 o'clock na 0 yung ating displacement, it took 8 minutes para maka-achieve tayo ng 850 meters na displacement. Aside from bar graphs, pie charts, and line graphs, we have other types of graphical representations. We have the histogram. Histogram is a type of a bar graph that displays the frequency of each class interval. Remember that for a histogram, it is always vertical. Wala tayong horizontal histogram. There are no gaps between the bars because they are always adjacent to one another. Here's an example of a situation for average grades. The class advisor already finalized the grades of his grade 7 students. To organize his data, he constructed a frequency table. Ito yung kanyang organized na constructed frequency table with class interval and the frequency for each class interval. We will be creating a histogram for this frequency distribution. For a histogram, this is a type of a bar graph. A histogram is a bar graph. Kaya naman, kapag tayo magko-construct ng histogram, kailangan din natin ng grid Wherein, itong mga nasa ibaba, ito yung ating grades or the class interval. Laging ang ating class interval ay nandito sa baba. Ilalagay natin yan 1 by 1. Ito yung ating nasa x-axis. At yung nasa y-axis naman natin ay yung frequency. Katulad din ng sa bar graph, you can set the frequency whichever you prefer so long as you can illustrate the frequency that is listed in our frequency distribution. In this case, ang ginamit ay by 2. Once you're able to set your elements in the horizontal and the vertical part, start shading the graph. Gawa tayo ng ating mga bar. From 70 to 74 na class interval, the frequency is 6. Ito yung ating part for 70 to 74 na class interval. Ang frequency daw natin ay 6. Kaya i-shade natin yung part ng 70 to 74 hanggang 6 lamang. Next, for the class interval 75 to 79, ito naman yung kanyang space. Ang frequency ay 8. Kaya i-shade natin yung part ng 75 to 79 up until 8. Next, for the class interval 80 to 84, ang frequency naman natin ay 12. Ito yung ating 12 na frequency. Tatapat natin dyan. Hanggang dito lang dapat. Ito naman yung part ng 80 to 84. Hanggang 12 lang yung ating isi-shade. So, hanggang dito lang siya. For 85 to 89 na class interval, we have frequency which is 10. So, dapat hanggang dito lang i-cover natin na space for 85 to 89. Lastly, yung ating class interval na 90 to 94 ay may frequency na 4. So, dapat hanggang dito lang siya sa 4. Ito yung kanyang space. Pero dapat hanggang 4 lang. Ito na yung ating constructed na histogram for this frequency distribution. Pansinin natin, they are always vertical. Laging nasa baba yung class interval. Ito yung ating independent variable at lagi namang ang frequency ay dapat na nasa y-axis yung ating dependent variable. Pansinin na yung bars natin ay adjacent, magkakatabi. Unlike a bar graph, wala siyang gaps, walang spaces. Because this is for a class interval. Bundled together at hindi siya para lamang sa bar graph na individual ang elements. From this histogram that we constructed for this frequency distribution, we can answer a few questions. What is the tallest bar in the histogram? The tallest bar here, as we can see, is for the class interval 80 to 84, meaning ito yung class interval na may highest frequency, which is 12. Sa section na ito, most of the students, ang kanilang average grade ay ranging from 80 to 84. On the other hand, what is the shortest bar displayed in the histogram? And then our answer will be 90 to 94. Ito yung may frequency na lowest, which is 4. Kumbaga sa section na ito, kakaunti lamang yung may mga grades that is ranging from 90 to 94. Lastly, we have Ogive. It's a type of a line graph that shows cumulative frequencies. When we say cumulative frequency, it's the sum of the class and all the classes below it in a frequency distribution. That is why an ogive is also sometimes referred to as a cumulative frequency graph or cumulative frequency curve. Pag nakita niyo yung tatlong term na yun, pareho lang yung graphical representation nun. Gagamitin natin yung same situation natin for average grades. Ito yung ating frequency distribution na may class interval and frequency. So for ogive, very important na alam natin na yung x-axis ang nakalagay doon ay ating class boundaries. And for y-axis, ang ilalagay natin ay cumulative frequencies. Kaya naman, bago tayo makapag-construct ng ating ogive, dapat makuha muna natin yung cumulative frequency at yung class boundary nitong ating class intervals. Kaya naman, dadagdagan natin ng column yung ating frequency distribution. One column for the lower class boundary, one column for upper class boundary at ang ating cumulative frequency. Now, for lower and upper class boundaries, we have discussed this in our lesson 3 about frequency distribution of a grouped data. For lower class boundary, we'll be looking at the lower class limits in each class interval. Kaya naman sa class interval na ito, yung mga nasa left side ng ating hyphen sa gitna, itong mga left side niya ay mga lower class limits. At yung mga nasa right side naman ng hyphen, ito naman yung ating mga upper class limits. So for lower class boundary, para makuha natin ito, we need to subtract 0.5 in each lower class limit per class interval. Kaya magsimula tayo dito sa class interval na 90 to 94. Ang ating lower class limit ay 90. Subtract tayo ng 0.5. Ang ating lower class boundary ay 89.5. Next, 85 ang ating lower class limit ng class interval 85 to 89. Subtract 0.5, magiging 84.5. Ang 79.5 ay galing naman sa 80 minus 0.5. 74.5 is the result of 75 minus 0.5. And lastly, para sa ating class interval na 70 to 74, 69.5 ang result ng 70 minus 0.5. For upper class boundary, titignan naman natin yung mga upper class limits. We'll add 0.5 in each. Sa ating class interval na 90 to 94, add 0.5 to 94. That will be 94.5. 89, add 0.5, kaya 89.5. Ang 84.5 ay galing naman sa 84 plus 0.5. 79.5 ay result ng 79 plus 0.5. And lastly, 74.5 ang result ng 74 plus 0.5 para sa ating last class interval. Once you're done completing the column for the lower and the upper class boundaries, it's time for you to complete the cumulative frequency. For you to do so, add another upper class boundary after the last class interval, which is 69.5. Saan nang galing ang 69.5? If we notice, itong ating upper class boundary na 89.5, this is the lower class boundary of the previous class interval. Ganon din yung 84.5. Upper class boundary natin siya sa 80 to 84 na class interval, pero lower class boundary siya ng previous class interval, which is 85 to 89. Pansinin natin yung kanilang relationship. Kaya naman, kung 69.5 itong ating lower class boundary nitong ating last class interval, at kung magkakaroon tayo ng class interval below it, we can assume that 69.5 will be the upper class boundary for this class interval. And this 69.5 upper class boundary, kaya tayo nag-add niyan dahil we need to always start our cumulative frequency with 0. Because we can start our cumulative frequency at 0 dito sa 70 to 74 na class interval because the frequency here is 6. So it's not possible. Kaya nagdagdag tayo ng isa pang upper class boundary para makapaglagay tayo at makapag-start tayo ng 0. Next, from 0, since a cumulative frequency is the sum of all classes, we need to add them up until 90 to 94. So from 0, add 6. 0 plus 6 is equal to 6. Lagay natin yung result dito. Next, 6 added to 8. The result is 14. Lagay ang result dito on top of 6. 14 plus 12 is equal to 26. Lagay ang result. 26 added to 10 is equal to 36. And 36 added to the last frequency, 4, which is equal to 40. Ito na yung ating cumulative frequency. Pansinin natin na ang ating total for frequency, ang ating end value ay 40. So to make sure that you have the correct cumulative frequency, dapat yung last digit natin, yung ating digit on the top, ay kapareho nung ating end value. Once you're done completing your frequency distribution, adding the class boundaries in the cumulative frequency, you can then proceed in constructing your ogive. An ogive is a type of a line graph. Kaya meron din tayong grid na ganito tulad sa line graph. Wherein, yung mga nasa baba, yung mga grades natin, this is the class boundary. Yung nasa y-axis naman natin, yung ating cumulative frequency, ito yung ating na-form kanina. For cumulative frequency, pansinin, we always start with 0, and then sinet ito by 2s. Once you've set your elements for the x and the y axis, start plotting. Now for plotting yung ating class boundaries, look at the upper class boundary from 69.5 up until 94.5. 69.5 to 74.5, ito yung kanyang covered na space. Ito naman yung next na class interval and so on hanggang dito sa dulo, 89.5 up until 94.5 because this is a bundle. For plotting the ogive, ang titignan natin ay ito lamang 2 columns na ito, upper class boundaries and cumulative frequency. 69.5, yung kanyang cumulative frequency ay 0, kaya mag-plot tayo sa kanilang intersection. For 74.5, ang cumulative frequency ay 6. Ito yung 74.5, cumulative frequency natin ay 6. I-plot natin yung kanilang intersection. 79.5, ang kanyang cumulative frequency ay 14. So, ito yung 14, ito yung kanilang intersection. Next, for 84.5, ang cumulative frequency naman ito ay 26. Ito yung 26, ito naman yung 84.5. Yung intersection nilang dalawa ay itong part na ito. 89.5, ang kanyang cumulative frequency ay 36. So, from here, plot tayo dun sa intersection nilang dalawa. Lastly, for 94.5, ang kanyang cumulative frequency ay 40. So, from this point, yung intersection nilang dalawa, mag-plot tayo. Once done plotting, connect the dots from 69.5 to 74.5 to 79.5 to 84.5, 89.5 up until 94.5. Ito yung ating space for 69.5 to 74.5, which is the class interval 70 to 74. 74.5 to 79.5, ito naman ay yung para sa 75 to 79 na class interval. Ito yung third class interval natin, fourth, and then fifth class interval, which is 90 to 94. From this ogive that we constructed, we can answer a few questions. How many students have a grade lower than 80? Meaning 80 na yung pinakamataas na possible grade nila. Ang kailangan natin ay yung mga grades that are lower than 80, which is, titingin tayo sa 79.5. Ang 79.5 na ating upper class boundary ay may cumulative frequency na 14. Therefore, 14 students ang may grades which are lower than 80 dahil 79.5 na yung at most na grades nila. Another question, how many students have a grade of at most 90? Meaning 90 and below. Pinaka-highest grade na dapat nila ay 90. Specifically, if we will be looking at this ogive, we'll be looking at 89.5. Ito na yung highest possible na grades nila, which is closer to 90. And we have 36 students with grades that are lower than 90. Now that we're done discussing each of the graphical representations one by one, let's compare them side by side. First, with the bar graph and the histogram. Nabanggit natin kanina that a histogram is a type of a bar graph. This is what a bar graph looks like. At ito naman yung nagawa nating histogram kanina. Comparing them side by side, makikita agad natin yung difference nila. Ang bar graph, meron siyang spaces in between. Ang histogram, wala. Adjacent bars, no gaps. Pansinin naman natin yung mga frequency distribution kung saan tayo nag-base para sa kanila. This is a frequency distribution for an ungroup data. And this is a frequency distribution for a group data. Kaya ang main difference natin ng bar graph at histogram ay a bar graph is used for ungroup data. And the histogram is used to graph grouped data.
Another set of comparison, we have the line graph and the ogive. This is how a line graph looks like. At ito naman ang ogive. At first glance, we may see that they look somehow similar. That is because an ogive is a type of a line graph. But what is the difference between the two? Looking closely doon sa ating mga frequency distribution where we base the data for the line graph and the ogive respectively, ito yung frequency distribution kung saan binase natin yung data for the line graph.
Ito naman yung frequency distribution for the Ogive. This frequency distribution is a frequency distribution for an ungrouped data, while the other one is a frequency distribution for a grouped data. So, yun ang main difference ng line graph and Ogive. We use a line graph for plotting ungrouped data, while on the other hand, we use an Ogive if we are plotting ungrouped data.
And that's it for our video for today, mga bata. Give this video a thumbs up kung natulungan kayo nito sa inyong lesson. Also, feel free to comment, subscribe to my YouTube channel, ang Teacher Mo sa Math, for more grade 7 content. Turn on the notification bell para lagi kayong updated kung meron na tayong bagong video. And of course, don't forget to share this video para mas marami pa akong mga grade 7 na batang tulad mo ang maaabot at maturuan, dahil ako si Ma'am Regine, ang Teacher Mo sa Math.